is, can kids be prophets? Sure. And the answer, of course, is yeah, kids can be prophets. I mean, like probably the most famous kid prophet was Jesus. I mean, when he was a child, he was already speaking to the elders in the temple about God, about how to live well, and grown-ups were going, whoa, we got to listen to this kid. So, there's a long tradition of kids being prophets as well as adults. But there's a particular living prophet today that's just actually a smidgy bit older than you that I'd like to mention this morning because she has been an inspiration worldwide, and she is a prophet. Now, we think of the word prophet and we think, oh, maybe that's somebody who's a fortune teller or predictor. But prophet really means truth teller. And the person I have in mind grew up in Pakistan. She was a daughter of a school teacher and a daughter of a father who said, "You go, girl." He could tell this daughter was a bright and bold young person. And when she was 11, she started blogging about girls going to school because the Taliban extremists had come into her town and had told all the girls and the women teachers to go home and never come back to school. They also did stuff like shut down the radio stations, made any music illegal, like these were not fun people. So Malala started blogging when she was 11 about this situation. And her parents were social justice activists. They were involved in human rights stuff. They were definitely fighting against the Taliban in their own ways. They said to her, yeah, you could do some, people started noticing her blog. And they said, you can go on national radio and TV and talk about this. And she did over and over again about girls need to go to school. We need an education too. We can't have half the population not be educated and not be able to fully contribute to our nation. So she would say all these things. She was speaking truth to power, and the Taliban were threatened by her. And so they set things up so they looked at the patterns of how she operated with her life. And while she was on a school bus, they shot her in the head and in the neck, thinking, oh, they've done away with that troublemaker, that Malala. Well, she survived. And her family was spirited out of Pakistan to England, where she got the surgery she needed to survive that horrible injury that could have killed her or disabled her for life. But it didn't. Luckily the bullets didn't hit the most vital parts of her brain. And as soon as she recovered from those injuries in England, she started talking again, truth to power. She started talking about how across the world, girls need an education. Because this wasn't just a problem in Pakistan, it was a problem in Afghanistan, and Nigeria, and in Jordan, and even in Kenya. And so she spoke internationally about this. She even went to the United Nations on her 16th birthday and spoke about the importance of education for girls. Money started pouring in from around the world because they recognized Malala as a prophet. And people were like, wow, she's on to something with this girls' education thing. And so a Malala Foundation was set up. And she funded girls' education projects in all those countries that I mentioned. And then she was actually nominated when she was 17 for the Nobel Peace Prize. And she won that. She won that. She's the youngest person to have ever done it. The youngest prophet that we probably have living today, that we know of so far. And she's turning 20 later this year. She's 19 right now. She'll be 20 later in 2017. And she travels the world. She can't go back to Pakistan for now because there's a price on her head. The Taliban are still wanting to kill her, to silence her from her truth-telling. But she travels around the world. She even came and spent some time here in the U.S. and visited the White House with the Obama family. So she is a prophet. And she started as a prophet as a kid and as a youth. So my question for you is, how will you stand for truth in the days to come? In what way will you be a prophet? In what way will you be inspired by Malala?
Please join me in responsive reading number 565 in your hardback hymnal. These words come to us from Reverend Clinton Lee Scott, a Universalist and humanist leader in the 20th century. Your part will be in italics. Always, it is easier to pay homage to prophets than to heed the direction of their vision.
It is easier blindly to venerate the saints than to learn the human quality of their sainthood.
It is easier to glorify the heroes of the race than
to give way to their examples.
To worship the wise is much easier than to profit by their wisdom.
Great leaders are honored not by adulation, but by sharing their insights and values.
Grandchildren of those who stoned the prophet sometimes gather up the stones to build the prophet's monument.
Always, it is easier to pay homage to prophets than to heed the direction of their vision.
It was April 1860, and Universalist minister Thomas Starr King stepped off the ship onto the soil of California to start his new ministry at the Unitarian Church in San Francisco. Now, he arrived there to great acclaim. He had quite a reputation already, even though he was actually a rather young man, just in his mid-30s. You see, he was from New England, and he was raised in a Universalist family. His father was a Universalist minister as well as a shoemaker. And unfortunately, his father died when Starr King, as he called himself, Starr King, was only 15. And so he had to go to work to support his mother and a chronically ill brother. He worked in the shipyards in Charlestown, Massachusetts, right near Boston and Cambridge. And whenever he could, he stole over to Harvard to listen to lectures and to study on his own in the library. And all that self-study in the midst of all the hard labor he was doing prepared him to when he was 21 years old to be called to be the minister of the Charlestown Universalist Church. Because that's how Universalists did that. They called people out from their congregations. And so he had a very successful ministry there. And at some other churches in Massachusetts. But he was also, during that time, interacting with the Unitarians of the day. He would go and spend time with Ralph Waldo Emerson over in, what that sound is.
You're brushing.
I think it's your robes.
Yeah, but that usually doesn't happen. Sorry. Is it still making weird sound?
That's better.
Okay, maybe something was loose. Whatever. Sorry. So, at any rate, he would go and have lunch with Ralph Waldo Emerson. He would learn about the Transcendentalist movement. He would go, maybe, I don't know, we keep having interesting challenges with our sound system. I don't know what is happening with our sound system lately. It seems like 1 week it's this mic, 1 week it's that mic. It's life. That's how things are. So he would go and spend time with Emerson and learn about the Transcendentalist notion of God being found in nature. And he would go up into the mountains of New Hampshire and be so enraptured that he would write about it. He even published a best-selling book about the beauty of nature in New Hampshire. But it was also spending time with Unitarian ministers like Theodore Parker, the famous abolitionist, the militant abolitionist. And he was really getting involved with the abolition movement. And then, because he didn't make a whole lot of money as a Universalist minister, the other way he would supplement his income with his speaking ability was to go on lecture tours. He would go all up and down the eastern seaboard doing lectures that were wildly popular. He was very, very popular. And some of the leading Unitarian ministers in New York were caught by his oratory, and they invited him to consider to be a Unitarian minister in New York. But quite honestly, the New York congregation said, well, he doesn't have a degree. He only had self-study. We don't want him. And so, in the meanwhile, though, other Unitarian churches around the country were hearing about this famous Starr King guy, and they started saying, come and be with us. Come and be with us. And the one church that caught his attention was the church out in San Francisco. Now keep in mind, our wonderful transcontinental railroad here in Utah had not been connected yet, and the only way to get there, other than the handcart thing, was to go around the bottom of the planet and up, and that's what he did, arriving there in San Francisco. Again, in great anticipation, because he was bringing a piece of the East to this frontier town. Remember that California had only been a state since 1850, only 10 years when he arrived. So things were a bit rough around the edges. So when he gets to California, he again becomes very popular, not only at his church, but he does speaking tours all the way up to British Columbia. Yeah, spoke even in Canada. And then, of course, down the coast to some of those other communities in California. And he was falling in love with the beautiful landscape and started writing things about Yosemite and Mount Shasta and other wonders of the West that then got sent east on the new telegraph, the new transcontinental telegraph that finally got connected in 1861. So people in the East started learning about the wonders of California from a spiritual point of view, initially from Starr King. This was all fine and good, but of course, our nation started going through probably the worst, undoubtedly, the worst chapter of its history right around that time. He was, you know what, I'm going to switch to the pulpit mic. Okay, we're switching to the pulpit mic. I just am aware that there's too much odd sound there. So, Starr King is aware that the Civil War is broken out and that telegraph line is bringing news from the East that is not sounding good. Now, the people way out in California knew that they weren't going to be called into the fight literally. California was a free state when it was established. It was a state not to have slavery when it was established in 1850. But Starr King, because he had traveled around the state, knew the realities of California. And that was that about 40% of the population were from the South and were in favor of secession. And on top of that, there were some Northerners who had emigrated to California who were in sympathy with the Confederacy. And he looked at the situation and said, okay, we're probably not going to have the battles here, but we have one key resource here that we cannot let the rebels get their hands on. And that was gold. Gold. Money. The money, the gold to make more money and to underpin the money. And so he switched his ministry from strictly parish ministry and this wonderful lecture tour thing that he's doing to be a prophetic ministry based on justice and not allowing California to secede and to allow slavery to come into California should the Confederacy be successful. And so he embarked on an exhausting set of experiences where he was traveling all over California, going to mining camps, going to any town of any size, talking about staying in the Union. And he worked hard for the Republican candidates. Keep in mind, remember, the Republicans of that day were the party of Lincoln. These were the people who were against slavery. And so his efforts, he was like this one-man dynamo going all over California, convincing people to vote Republican, and indeed, a Republican governor and legislature got elected. And they said they voted to keep California in the Union. But there was another thing going on too. He was getting telegrams from the East during the war from his old friend Henry Whitney Bellows, the minister in New York who had encouraged him, the Unitarian minister in New York, who had encouraged him to have a ministry there. And Bellows, by this time, had quit that New York ministry entirely and devoted himself to organizing the U.S. Sanitary Commission. Now keep in mind, there was this horrible war going on, and the government was utterly unprepared in any way to deal with the wounded and to deal with the aftermath of anything when towns got devastated. And so a volunteer organization founded by Unitarian minister Henry Whitney Bellows, the U.S. Sanitary Commission, was formed to create hospitals, to send doctors and supplies down to the front, to minister to whoever needed it, whether they were Union or Confederate soldiers. And so Henry Whitney Bellows sent telegraph after telegraph to Starr King and said, we need money. We need money. You guys can't come over here and fight easily all the way from California, but please, go around the state and get as much money as you can. And that's exactly what Starr King did. He had saved California for the Union, and then he said, we need to support our soldiers and their families and our nation. And so he went around speaking truth to power again in California, going back to all those places that he had visited before on the campaign trail, asking people to do the right thing and step up to give money for the Sanitary Commission. And to give you an idea of how successful he was raising $2,000 and $3,000 and $4,000 a night in 1862 and $63. Think of how much that would be today. This enormous amount of money. A full quarter of the money that supported the U.S. Sanitary Commission came from California. And some of it even came from British Columbia, which is shocking because England was siding with the rebels. But the West Coast Canadians were like, we're with Starr King. So the Canadians were even in on it. And while all this was going on, there was a price on Stark King's head. There were people, that 40% of the secessionists out there in his state, who were like, we got to do this guy in. There were death threats. There were all kinds of things. Our editorials written in newspapers about how dangerous he was, because he was a prophet. He was out there doing the right thing for justice. Now, unfortunately, Stark King exhausted himself, quite literally, in this whole process. He caught diphtheria, because they didn't have the vaccine back then, and that went very quickly into pneumonia. And within a few days, he died when he was only 39 years old. The city of San Francisco and the state of California were devastated by the loss of this man. He had only been there for 4 years, and yet he had done all these things so well and so publicly and so controversially. 20,000 people in San Francisco lined the streets to come to see him laid out at First Unitarian Church. Flags were at half-mast throughout the state. Cannons were fired in his honor. He had saved California for the Union, and he had sent the gold east for a good cause. And people honored him for that. He was a prophet in his own day. And he was also the first bridger of Unitarian and Universalist life. He was a precursor of the denomination we have today. In an ironic twist, there's this. He was honored well for quite a while after his death. There's a beautiful statue by the famous sculptor David French in Golden Gate Park. There was also a statue created of Stark King to go into our nation's capital. And when the Capitol building decided to create a special section for people who were exemplars from every state, each state got to send 2 people. California's one of the California people that were sent. Well, it was Father Junipero Serra from the colonial days, helping found California, and the other was Stark King. And Stark King's statue stood proudly for decades in the U.S. Capitol, until at some point in the last few years, some people in the California legislature said, I think we need Ronald Reagan there instead. And they removed Stark King's statue and put Ronnie in. Just saying. So, Stark King was an amazing orator. I just want to share 2 little pieces of his oration with you, because this gives you an idea of the prophetic messages that he was giving. When he was going around talking about keeping California in the Union, these are some of the words he said. Rebellion, meaning the Confederacy. Rebellion sins against the Mississippi. It sins against the coastline. It sins against the ballot box. It sins against the oath of allegiance. It sins against public and beneficent progress and history and hope. The worth of the laborer, the rights of man. It strikes for barbarism against civilization. You can imagine, this guy was on fire. But he also said other things, because he was an abolitionist. This is what he proclaimed publicly, but he also sent this in a telegram to President Lincoln. At one point, he said, "Oh, that the president would soon speak that electric sentence. Inspiration to the loyal North, doom to the traitorous aristocracy whose cup is guilt." let him say that it is a war of mass against class, of America against feudalism, of the schoolmaster against the slave master, of the workmen against the barons, of the ballot box against the barracoon. This is what the struggle means. Proclaim it so, and what a light breaks through our leaden sky. The ocean wave rolls then with the impetus and weight of an idea. Starr King, one of our Unitarian Universalist prophets. So you might be thinking, well, what does she really mean by prophet? Because I know that word has particular meaning here in Utah. But we're not talking about that prophet today, or any of the current people who hold the title of prophet. As we kick off our month of exploring the meaning of prophecy, we're going to step back just a bit and make sure we know what we mean when we say prophet or the prophetic tradition. Because its roots go back thousands and thousands of years, when prophets were the ones who spoke truth to power, who called out corruption and greed, sin, and they did it loudly and clearly and very publicly. These were the unpopular guys of the Old Testament, the ones standing up to kings and priests and power structures, all in the service of justice in their communities, where they saw and lived the very real oppressions that were going on at the time. These were the guys calling forth the powers of love to stand against hate, even when they endured threats and torture for their truth-telling. See if any of these people and their quotes sound familiar to you. We have the prophet Micah saying, "He has showed you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God." And then the prophet Amos was upset with elaborate temple ceremonies that he eclipsed any kind of ethical religion in his day. And he says this, he says, "I hate, in fact, I despise your feasts, and I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. But let justice roll down like the waters, and righteousness flow like an everlasting stream." Yeah, those were the guys. Christian theologian Peter Santucci reminds us that the biblical prophet didn't so much predict the future, but rather spoke for God in a world that went askew by forgetting about God and goodness. And so prophets spoke both for God and about God, reminding their listeners that they'd forgotten something essential. We, here in this faith, are the inheritors of this prophetic tradition, a practice of not merely being predictors of the future, but architects of it, lifting up moral values, the common good, the notion that fairness, equity, compassion, and justice are the higher ground. Prophets understood their mission as serving people by dealing with the structures of society that were oppressing them. And so in thinking about who is a prophet, as I prepared for this sermon, I got rather overwhelmed in a good kind of a way by the sheer abundance of prophets out there, those hardy souls who spoke truth to power, warned us of the consequences of our sinful ways, and stood for justice on the side of the oppressed. To be honest, it was hard for me to pick up a single soul to lift up, because there's so many that have gone before us, some in our very own Unitarian and Universalist traditions. People like Susan B. Anthony, Albert Schweitzer, Dorothea Dix, Claire Barton, James Reed, and Thomas Starr King. And think of all the people from other traditions. Jesus of Nazareth, the Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him. Martin Luther King Jr., Mahatma Gandhi, Rachel Carson, Malala, Nelson Mandela, Maya Angelou, Langston Hughes, so many others. I invite you just for a moment here, just call out the names of people that you have been inspired by as prophets. Who would that be for you? Lin-Manuel Miranda, yeah. Who else?
Marion Wright Edelman.
Yes, Marion Wright Edelman.
Brian Stevenson.
Brian Stevenson. Gandhi. Who else?
Siddhartha Gautama. Buddha.
Buddha, yes. The Buddha. Yes. There are many. There are many, many out there. But here's the thing. We often refer to prophet as an individual, one of these famous exemplars. But the truth is that none of these charismatic people acted alone. Unitarian Universalist theologian Rebecca Parker lifts up the truth that behind the lone prophet who speaks up, there is a group. It is always a mistake to imagine that lone prophets are really alone. We should think of Jesus this way as well. It's a mistake to see him as an isolated, heroic individual. It is better to see him as the crest of a wave, the sparkling foam breaking brightly from the force of the whole ocean, moving and swelling up from underneath. I sense among Unitarian Universalists these days a deep desire to affirm the ocean that is within and beneath the voices of individual conscience that we celebrate. And so, when we speak about prophetic community, this ocean that's swelling from underneath, we mean religious community that seeks to intervene in human history for the sake of social justice. The prophetic liberal church does not derive its authority from a supernatural source, but rather from the imperative that our very freedom must extend to all. If we believe in our freedom as a core value, then we need to live and act in ways that secure that freedom for all, for everybody. That's our imperative. It's what we're called to do. 20th century Unitarian theologian James Luther Adams tells us this: the prophetic liberal church is the church in which all members share the common responsibility to attempt to foresee the consequences of human behavior, both individual and institutional, with the intention of making history in place of merely being pushed around by it. Only through the prophetism of all believers can we together foresee doom and then mend our common ways. So yes, prophets call us to recognize the lack of justice and compassion in our society. The prophet says, pay attention. Prophets invite us to help heal human hurt and misery. The prophet says, give generously, be kind, and help others. Prophets urge us to address the injustices that cause that misery. The prophet says, reach out, listen to those who are oppressed, organize for change. And who are these prophets? We are. We are a prophetic community, naming what is wrong, standing up for what is right, and working to create justice, peace, and compassion in all the various ways we can. So when I ask the question, who is your prophet? The answer really is, you are. We are all prophets together, and we can shape the days to come. We can turn the tide of history, and we can leave the world a better place for those who follow us. We can be those whose praises are sung in centuries hence. We're going to be talking more about how we're going to do this together as this month unfolds and as the months after that unfold. But this is the truth. We need to take courage because you are bold prophets, every single one of you. And together with our allies, we will build a land where justice and mercy flow. Our voices today are just as important as Star King's was in his day. So let's be bold and brave together, because the truth is this: our nation and our whole world is counting on us.
Thou